If you are thinking of some sort of change, career, life change, if it keeps coming back to you, you keep thinking about it, it probably is really important for you to do.
You don't have to wait until you reach financial independence to start enjoying your life. You can do that much earlier and start living a life that you love and that's true to you. Welcome to Freedom Before FI. Using FIRE and life design techniques, we help you create freedom on your way to FI instead of waiting until you're retired to do the things that light you up. I'm your host Greg, a FIRE movement and life design enthusiast. If you're itching to get freedom now, then let's do this. Hello and welcome back to another episode, and I hope you're doing well today. Now, work is such a vital piece of our life puzzle that we have to get right. Otherwise, if not, it can lead to dissatisfaction, feeling trapped with golden handcuffs, or even burnout. But what if you're already at that point where you're not happy, or maybe you're yearning for something different, but not quite sure what else is out there for you? Now, one of the things that we discuss on this podcast is how a career change can give you that element of freedom, especially when you're not feeling in alignment with what you're doing right now. So to shed a little bit of light on this, I'll be speaking with Lisa Hoashi. Lisa's an ICF certified coach, and for the last 10 years, she's been helping professionals and businesses improve their work life using their big picture goals. She specialises in helping people at crossroad moments and transition periods, helping them gain clarity to take new steps forward to a more meaningful and authentic path. So some of the things you'll learn today include Lisa's background and her own crossroads moment, how she became a career coach and how others can too, example client transitions, what they've done before and what they do now, advice on moving to a lower paying job, the outline steps to make a career change, typical internal barriers holding people back, how to fund a change, answering the question, do you need to go back to university, and the number one hack for a successful career change. Oh, just really quickly before we jump into the interview, if you hadn't had a chance to check out our free guides, you can download them from our website freedombeforefi.com. One of the guides is the free Find Your Purpose worksheet, which I'll also link in the show notes. All right then, let's jump into this awesome interview with Lisa. So welcome, Lisa. Thank you very much for joining us. Really happy to have you on the show. I'm really looking forward to what we're going to be talking about today because we'll be focusing on sort of the career change aspects. And obviously, you're a great person to be discussing, the perfect person to be discussing things about career changes. So, Lisa, if you don't mind giving us a quick intro about yourself, where in the world are you, what you're up to, what's keeping you busy, that kind of thing.
Sure, sounds good. Really glad to be here, Greg. Thanks for inviting me on. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk about my work a bit because, as you know, work is so important to get right, especially as you're thinking about really designing the type of life that you would like to have. So that's really key to my work. So I'm Lisa Hoashi, and I am from Portland, Oregon. And I now live north of Barcelona on a farm with my husband and 2 kids. And a lot of times people are like, well, how did you end up there in rural Spain from Portland, Oregon? And yeah, that's a key part of my story and about how I became a coach. So I'm a life and career coach now. And basically, I was in my early 30s and I was working in communications for a global NGO. So working in humanitarian aid and international development. In my early 30s, I was starting to get really burned out and also disillusioned with my field. And I was just starting to feel like maybe I was on the wrong path for me. However, I was kind of afraid of shaking things up, like both life and career-wise, in part because I felt like I had reached a really successful stage, at least like outer success, you know? And in part, it was hard to shake things up because I'm Japanese American, and I felt like I needed to follow a traditional career path, life path,
Yeah,
especially
yeah.
from, okay. So is this familiar, Greg?
Yeah, this sounds a bit familiar, maybe from an Asian background. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, Asian background. Yes. A lot of people as well. From American, it's sort of the American immigrant kind of story, get a
Yeah, yeah.
good education, lots of pressure to get a good education, get a good job, make lots of money, have all the usual trappings, buy a house, have a family, kids, and then repeat. So I felt like I was on the wrong path and that I probably would need to shake things up in a pretty big way to kind of find my right path. And I'd actually been considering taking a year-long sabbatical for a long time. It was becoming more pressing because I had burnout and I really needed to recover from that. And I also had this desire to explore these different paths that I could potentially take with my life and work.
Mm-hmm.
I finally got the courage up when I was 34 and took a year-long break. And during that time, I traveled and I fell in love with a farmer who lived north of Barcelona. And so that's how I ended up here. And after my year off, I decided I wanted to be here to make a life with him. And I also decided I wanted to kind of give up that like really high pressure, travel all the time kind of career. And I wanted to like be more rooted in one place. And so I was like, okay, what could I do remotely from this farm? And I decided that I would start my own business and that I would become a coach. So I researched that. I had worked with a coach previously who had really had a transformational effect on my life. And I really wanted to share what I had learned with other people through that experience. And it also was a really good fit for my strengths and my experience. And so, yeah, I've been doing it for 10 years now.
Amazing. Oh, that's so cool. That's you could see like going on a sabbatical, it kind of sparks like this new sort of, it's like you're going on one journey, you go on a sabbatical, and then it's like the journey like changes direction slightly. And yeah, it's so cool what the sabbatical does. And how you come out of it. Like it's kind of like, I think someone mentioned something about being in like a cocoon and you go on a sabbatical with it and you kind of at the end of it you kind of like open up into this like butterfly.
Sure. Yeah, I mean it's really scary to take a sabbatical, because you really are kind of putting an end point, right? Like closing a chapter in your life and starting something totally new and saying, I'm actually really open to what else might be possible. And of course, everyone is kind of different in how open they go into a sabbatical.
Yeah.
But I was really open. I was like, okay, I'm curious about what other possibilities there are for my life and also for my work. Like it's open, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say, I remembered you mentioned on an episode, I think it was one of your Leap Like Me episodes, you mentioned at the beginning of your sabbatical, you went hiking somewhere and you were on a trailhead, you were unloading something in your car or something, and you met this guy who came along. I think he was like a Microsoft executive, like he just finished, like he retired. And he said something interesting to you, he said something along the lines of, he's been working all this time, and it's at this point in his stage when he's, in his life when he's retired, now he can kind of do these trails and go on these hikes and go into nature. And that's all he's always wanted to do. I think you had a sort of kind of a slight epiphany. You're like, yeah, well, it's good that I've done this sabbatical because you could kind of do things, all these things that you wanted to do. You're able to kind of do that, take that time off. And I think that kind of helped, like just pushed you like, yeah, this sounds like I'm on the right path type thing. So I thought that was quite an interesting.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah. I have a podcast that's called Leap Like Me, and it's about the leaps that people take in life to live a life that's more meaningful to them. And we've covered different types of leaps, and I shared about my sabbatical. I'm glad that you mentioned. So that man that I met on the trail, yeah, I did a lot of backpacking and camping during my year off. And yeah, I met this Microsoft executive in the Olympic National Forest in Washington. And yeah, he said from his office in Seattle, he could like see the Olympic mountains, like these same mountains, throughout his career. And he was just like, I bet there's some great hikes out there. And when I met him on the trail, yeah, he was now retired. And he was like, this is all I want to do. Like, I just want to be out here, you know? And yeah, he actually, I kind of felt like since he was more of like a father's age and who like had a very successful career himself, that he might kind of scold me for like, what are you doing quitting your job mid-career and, you know, taking off to go hiking, you know, because it was like very clear that we were both out in the forest on a weekday. Usually I would be back at my office, you know, it was still very fresh, like what I would typically be doing on a day like that. And instead he was like, isn't this amazing? And he was like, good for you. And just gave me a lot of support actually, because it had been really hard to make that leap for me.
Yeah, it's a big mindset barriers when you're doing it. So I wanted to focus on your career coaching side in a minute, but you mentioned quite a few things I just wanted to unpack, because obviously did you say your international development, that was your kind of what you were doing before? And I suppose some people might assume like, you know, if you're doing something like, you know, in humanitarian aid, in that kind of sort of sphere of that industry, or that space, people might think, oh, that's quite meaningful. That's like, you know, you're doing something for, you know, whether it's people in difficulties or things like that around the world. It could kind of mean like, oh, they're doing something meaningful and quite purposeful. When you first started doing that role, was it kind of like a dream job in air quotes, or did you consider it that at the beginning, or not really, or was it just it was just a job that kind of came along? What can you just take me through that bit?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great question. So yes, when I started working for this organization, it was like my dream organization. And I worked, I think total there 6 years. About midway through, I really got my dream job, which was, working as a public informational officer. So working in communications, reporting on the earthquake that happened in Haiti in 2010. And I was based both in Portland and also in Port-au-Prince, and going out, talking to people who had been impacted by the earthquake, reporting back on the organization's efforts there. And, you know, it was a dream job because I was using all my communication skills of writing and speaking and interviewing, and for a cause that I felt was really meaningful, right? And however, it was really hard there. And a lot of the realities there was very hard. And I also was really disillusioned with how I saw the way that aid was being delivered there and the way it worked. And eventually from that year, I had PTSD. It was just really, really difficult. So, I mean, the burnout was really like PTSD level, you know? And yeah, so it was really a reckoning for me about whether I wanted to continue on in that field or if I wanted to do something else. And I think this is like a very important thing at that point to consider, is really like, you know, is this what I want to devote my life to dealing with? Like, is this the problem that I really want to dedicate, you know, so much of my time and energy to? And for me, eventually, because it took another 3 years, I then went on to take another position that was internal communications. And I thought, like, do I want to give aid a little bit more of a chance, or do I want to change? And it was really hard to leave a field like that is so mission driven. You know, you feel like a traitor. You feel like, who am I? You know, when I have visited camps in Port-au-Prince for people whose lives have been destroyed by an earthquake, who are in Syrian refugee camps, like, who am I to then like take time off and, you know, travel the world and then become a life coach? You know, it's just like, it was really hard to reckon with all of that. But eventually I realized, you know, I don't know if this is the fight that I want to dedicate my whole life to.
Yeah.
And if I want to make so many sacrifices personally, it was really time for me to prioritize some other parts of my life that had taken a backseat to my career.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And then it's obviously fast forward, and then, you obviously become a life coach. As you said, you've been doing that for 10 years. Yeah, I think it says on your LinkedIn, you're a big picture career coach. Can you explain that? That's sounds interesting.
Yeah. So I've always kind of played with like life coach, career coach. What is the right title for me? And I feel like big picture career coach is the best name I've been able to come across so far, because my clients, the number one thing that they want to work on with me is getting work right. Like, can I improve my experience at work? Can I feel like I have work that's more meaningful to me? I feel like I'm on the wrong path. I want to get on one that feels more right for me. So, all these questions around work, that's like the number one goal that people bring to me. However, I am definitely not just the person who's like focused only on your next promotion and your, the next salary. And, I really want to open it up to the big picture of like, what do people ultimately want out of life? Like, how are they going to look back on life and say, yeah, like, no regrets. I really am happy with what I was able to do with my life. And I want work to really support those goals for them. So what we really work on is, how can we align your career with your bigger picture goals?
Yeah, I love that. Speaking my language, because over what we do, it's all about, life design. And although on the podcast, we do have like a slight lean towards like the financial side, but only a little bit. But actually the majority of it is around designing your life to how, what suits you, what lights you up, what do you enjoy doing? And as you said, it's not just about like the salary thing and the promotion thing. There's more to it. There's like a holistic view. There's, whether it's your passions and, your family or whatever it is, to also include that in the picture as well. I kind of thought it was along those lines. It was just good just to get clarity. And I like that title.
Yeah. I mean, Greg, I also felt a lot of alignment between you and me and what you're trying to do with this podcast and the people, the issues the people and the issues that you're really thinking about. Because, when you're thinking about like freedom along the way to like this final end goal, right? I also that's something that I've really discovered is important as well, with working with clients. So when I first work with someone, we really start thinking about like, what is that bigger picture vision that you have? Like, what is kind of the perfect vision that you have for what kind of work you'll do, what kind of lifestyle you'll have, including like what kind of, financial situation will you have. But then, it's like we work in a very complex and imperfect world, right? So we never know really what's going to happen with that big end goal that we have. But it's really important to understand that this is just a journey. There is no arriving, and to really enjoy ourselves along the way and make sure that we are still feeling good day to day about where we are and what we're doing.
Yeah, I love that, like, no arriving thing. There's this arrival fallacy, like, oh, once I get X, or once I get this house, or once I get this promotion, I'll be happy then. Or when I get this car, I'll be happy, or whatever it is. When I like what you said, is it's not about arriving. It's about enjoying like your path to get there and the journey there. So yeah, absolutely love that.
For sure.
So as a life coach or a coach in general, what kind of, how does someone become one? What are like, is there any hard skills or soft skills? If someone was come to you and say, oh, Lisa, I want to do what you're doing. What do I have to do? If they're inspired by your story, how would you like advise them?
Yeah. So this was my question when I, was thinking of starting my own business. Yeah. What's next? I was fortunate to be able to talk with a number of different coaches that were referred to me. So I did a number of informational interviews. This is what I also recommend to my clients when they're thinking about a new career pivot, right? So yeah, I mean, the first thing to know about coaching is that it's not a regulated field. So, a psychologist or, different types of professionals, you might have to have a license, et cetera. you can call yourself a coach and just like, create a website and say, I'm a coach, However, I recommend going through a coach training and then certification program, because there are definitely tools and frameworks that are important to know, as well as I think it's really important that you understand the ethics of coaching, because you have a really powerful impact on people's lives, a lot of influence. And so I think that's something that's important to be taken seriously. So one of the certifying bodies, the biggest one in the world, is the International Coaching Federation. And so they are a certifying body. You can get a certification through them at different levels. And then also they look at different educational programs and will say that those are approved within their framework. So that's what I did. I took a coach training program that was certified by the ICF, the International Coaching Federation.
Yep.
And then I was certified through them and continue learning and being recertified through them, maintaining their ethical practices. Yeah.
Okay, got that. And then any kind of soft skills you think would be useful for a life coach?
So being a good listener is very important. I'm someone who's very high in empathy. So I think, being empathetic is really important. And I would say there's being really interested in other people and in their growth, I think, is really important. Being able to see their potential and nurture them, and also hold really, it's like coaching is really like a structure, a space that you're holding for people, for them to really discover, what is important to them. How do they think? What are their beliefs? What are some assumptions they might be making? It's like a space that you're holding, and then also a structure for them to begin to move forward. So for your listeners that have maybe had therapy, but never had a coach, I think an important distinction is that a coach is always going to kind of push things forward in the conversation toward action. Like there's this bias toward action. So at the end we might have like a one-on-one session with someone, in the same way that you might with a therapist, talk about a number of different things. However, at the end, you're always going to say, okay, what are you going to do with that learning now? How are you going to take it back out into your life, into the world? And how are you going to use it? So there's like designing actions and accountability structure that's kind of, built into it. Yeah.
Nice. Oh, amazing. And then just on that note, I know you've got 2 services that I'm just interested to know more about. I think you've got Catalyst Coaching and Illuminate Your Career Path. So those sound interesting. What can you sort of unpack those 2 services? Who's it for? What's included? Timelines? Just
Sure.
That sounds really cool.
So Eliminate Your Career Path is a digital course that I have. And basically it takes people through the main steps that I've found can really help people set themselves up for really understanding what kind of, what would be the next steps for their career. So it takes you through a number of sort of reflective exercises that really help you to understand, where have you been, where are you right now, and where is it that you would like to go. So that's available on my website. And then Catalyst Coaching is really my signature coaching program that I have for people who are in a moment of transition. So I often, when I initially thought that I would become a coach, I thought I would coach people around taking a sabbatical, like what I had just done. And what I realized is that I actually was interested in the moment before people take a sabbatical, which is that moment where you're like, I think I'm kind of at a crossroads here. Like, what should I do next? And that's the place that's really interested to me to help, because number one, it can feel really isolating. Like you're all alone and you're like, I don't know what to do. Like, should I go on this path or should I go on this one? What is next for me? And I love helping people clarify for themselves what is the right path for them. So really thinking, what's the end goal? Where am I at right now? and which of these different options, because a lot of times people are thinking, maybe I take sabbatical, maybe I change jobs, maybe I move somewhere. Like could be thinking all kinds of different options. And Catalyst coaching is really like the place where we clarify like which of these directions that they might be considering is the right one for them. Typically it's about 4 months long. But yeah, I like to work with people in sort of concentrated sections of like 4 months. However, some of my clients do go on a little bit longer. So 6 months or even up to a year.
Okay. Yeah. How about the Illuminate Your Career one?
Illuminate Your Career Path is an online course. And so really, if you want to go all the way through it, then you could go through it in like a week or so.
Self-paced,
if you put in like if you put in a half hour a day, it would be about a week long. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So that sounds really cool. I like those two services. And what I wanted to get more understanding of and get into the juicy part is like examples of some of the clients, maybe 2 or 3 examples, just to, like if someone's listening and, it might resonate with them. Like what would you say is like their kind of like typical profile, where they usually come from, like, or like where in the world, what stage in their career, what stage in their life? Can you give us like some ideas of maybe the demographics and that kind of thing, and with some examples?
So most of my clients are in their mid-career, so they've already had like, successful careers. I would say generally my clients would be considered kind of like how I was talking about earlier, like maybe outwardly successful, but they're kind of feeling like, they're still not kind of hitting it. And they feel like slightly off, like that there's something maybe more out there for them. And are really considering like, what should I do next? I feel like this is an important new stage. So I often think of, it's often like, we hit crossroads throughout our lives. It can be, in our 30s, it can be in our 40s, it can be like the sort of thinking about the next chapter in our careers or in our lives. And my clients, I would also say many of them are from the US, many are from Europe. I would say those are the main concentrations. At various times, I've had like the majority are people who are living outside of their native country. So people who are living, in a country which is not where they were born. Yeah.
Like expats type thing?
Yeah, expats.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just like what I'm doing now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. One very typical type of client I would have to say is kind of the golden handcuffs client, right? So people who are like, I have a really high paying job. It's a job that has been on a career track for me. It's really safe. However, I know it's not working for me. So how do I leave this? How do I start something totally new? And that is really hard, right? Which is why they come looking for a coach to support them with that, right? Mm-hmm. So I actually have a rule a lot of times of like helping people quit their jobs. Like, you
should change your name on LinkedIn.
Exactly. I don't know. It doesn't like sound as good, right? Yeah. I can help you quit your job. But yeah, so it can be really exciting though to help people really discover what it is that they want. So, for example, one of my clients was working in Silicon Valley and she realized she really wanted out of that lifestyle. Like she was making a lot of money, but there was a lot of turnover at her tech company and it was super stressful. She wasn't working for people she really liked anymore. There was so much turnover and the lifestyle was really expensive and she had a young family. So she was starting to realize that she had the expertise and really the desire to start her own consulting company. So it wasn't like, she was working in the same career track, but she would now start working for herself. And she was really scared to do that because she had a lot of weight on her in terms of like family obligations. And also because as part of this, they would probably need to move from Silicon Valley to some place that was cheaper. So yeah, I have to say like that was one of my favorite clients to work with because she really had the skills to do what she wanted to do already. And it was about the mindset and really about the planning. So we worked together to really think about, okay, what is her ideal outcome? If she did have her own business, what would it be like? Who would she be working with? Even just like, what would her office space be like, to help her really envision it. And then thinking about, we went through lists of like, what would be the right place for her and her family to live. And she would go work with her husband to kind of see to go through those different options and to start narrowing them down. And eventually she was able to make the leap of quit that job and strike out on her own. They moved to a different city and she's incredibly successful. She just ran with that business and she just had her first book in her field published. And so she's doing awesome.
I like what you said. One of the typical things you see is the golden handcuffs thing. They're in a cushy, someone might be in a cushy job earning quite a decent salary, a high salary, but obviously they may be feeling feelings of maybe it's burnout or whatever it is. And then, they're thinking of doing something different. What is that change? What sparks the kind of, okay, all right, I think I do need to change and I'll do it. From saying, I'm not sure to I'll do it. What usually sparks that flip or that you see? Or is it a spark, or is it just it takes ages to get there? How is that? What's that process like?
Oh, that's such a great question. I like. Maybe you have some familiarity with that. There are different ways, right? It does really depend on the person. I would say sometimes it's just pure misery. Unfortunately, people are just feeling really miserable and they just are going down and down and down and down. And they're just I gotta get myself out of this. And I think what can be really hard then when you're doing it by yourself is you're I am really down. I'm really drained. I don't feel well and I'm really unhappy. And I also, usually what goes along with that, whether we want it or not, is low self-confidence because you're starting to question whether you can get yourself out of this situation, right? And I think that's where a coach can be so helpful is that I can come in and help them to reconnect with their strengths and with their vision and to start feeling excited about what the future really can hold. And that it really... to provide just some of that support and encouragement that things are going to be okay. And that they can get out of this situation. I think the other things are sometimes people can get just tired, sick of hearing themselves say they're going to do this thing. This happened to me too. I just felt like
partners are sick of it, isn't it?
Right. Exactly. You start to see that people around you are sick of you hearing you talk about it. And that's often another reason for reaching out to a coach, right? My spouse is tired of me talking about this. I can't talk to them about it anymore. So I'll come talk to you about it. And the other things that can happen though are big life events, right? You could lose your job or, you could have a death of someone close to you that is kind of or you could have a health scare, right? Those things where you're just it kind of wakes you up and you're okay, it's time. I can't wait anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. And also what I'm also curious about is, people that may be on a high salary and they're oh, I want to do something different. But that something different could be a much lower salary level.
Yes.
Do you get that a lot? And did people actually make the move, or do sometimes people I'm not going to move? What have you found in that situation? And what have they done?
That's a great example too. Yes. So, and this actually, I do often work in this space because I have a background as a creative. I started out my career as a writer. And I still am a writer. I actually am writing a memoir right now about my sabbatical experience and how I got here. But because I have this creative background, people who also have creative backgrounds, but maybe have found themselves in a professional career that is not related to their creative side, and they're wanting to switch back, right? So for example, in the last year, I've worked with 2 lawyers who wanted to leave law, and, they're making a ton of money. They are often the breadwinners for their families. And they're like, yeah, I really want to go back though to feeling like I have work that's more meaningful. But I know I'm not going to make as much money as I am right now as a lawyer, and maybe I never will again. Right. So it is important to know that a career change can often have trade-offs with it, but it's part of this overall valuation that you're doing for your life, right? Like, what kind of life do I really want to have? Do I want to enjoy my day-to-day more often? Do I want to feel like I have a slower pace? Do I want to feel like I'm able to pick up my kids every day from school? Like, it's really about coming up with the priorities. So, when I work with people, it's all about like thinking about what are those values? What are those priorities? How do you want your life to feel? And then let's solve for that. But of course, I always am going to ask my clients to also really think about like how much money is enough. And I'm not going to tell you like, oh yes, just go for that thing that's, your heart desires, but don't think about the practicalities like that. Those are all going to have an impact on your overall happiness. Like if you're not making enough money, that's not a good situation either. So we want to figure out what is the right amount of money for you to have. And think about I really want to like always for us to aim for what is the ideal, right? What's the ideal amount of money? And also what's the ideal lifestyle that you want to have? And let's see if we can get that. Maybe we go out in the world and we find out, okay, it's not possible. Then we come back and we tweak it and we figure out like, what is the best that you can have for now? That's part of being on the journey as well.
Yeah. I like that. I know we talked about like meaning when you were in your previous career, that in the beginning it was like meaningful. Do you get clients that are like in a job that was meaningful to them, or they considered their dream job at the time, and then it just didn't become their dream job as well? Do you get people coming to you like that? Like, oh, this is a dream job for the last X number of years, but they're not enjoying it? Or is that you don't get that much of that, I'm assuming?
Well, I think dream jobs can be true. Like we can have our dream jobs for a time, but I think the world is always evolving, right? We're changing, the world is changing, circumstances are changing. So I think it's like, I just don't think that the dream jobs endure, So I have a client right now, for example, she's a commercial photographer and was having, huge success traveling to different places around the world for her commercial photography business. And now she's ready to let it go. It was a dream job, but the industry, for example, was impacted in a huge way by the pandemic. And things are really changing now. AI is also really changing a lot in her field. And she's starting to realize that maybe she's done with, like, it was a dream job. She definitely had some dreamy moments in that job. And now she's ready to move on to the next thing. Yeah. And it's sad. I think in some ways it's sad, like any time of our lives that has passed, right? That we can't really get it back. But it's time to move on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was also just thinking about when you were saying about that was, we talked about like big changes, like, from one thing to like something totally different. Can a career change be also like just a slight shift in what you're currently doing, whether it's from like maybe the same company but just a different role, or maybe a slight tweak in the job description, or like a small change? Can that have an effect as well? Or do you feel like it needs to be like, okay, you need to leave this and do something completely different? Or what's your thoughts about like slight tweaks that can help people? Or
oh, absolutely. Yeah. I don't just work with people on making sort of grand, huge changes. And, I would also say that those are some of the hardest to do, right? They often take a lot longer than we think. There can be bigger challenges. And so, I often work with clients who are really just thinking about, okay, what's my next step in my career? So yeah, it could be staying at the same company and just looking for like, what are the next opportunities? What are things that are going to be a better fit? So I love looking with people about like what they're currently doing and doing a bit of a look at like, in which ways is this role a good fit for them, and which ways could it be a better fit for them? And there might be some possibilities to make some changes to what their current role, to make it more enjoyable and more meaningful to them and use their strengths better. Or it could also be it could be that, and also looking for like what the next right thing is that's going to be a good fit for them. And then thinking strategically about how to do that. So how to start communicating to your mentors, to your boss about like, what are the things that you're looking for as your next step in your job? How to kind of raise your profile in your job, to talk about what are the things that you're accomplishing and what are you doing well, to be able to get those next opportunities for yourself. Yeah.
Sounds good. So Lisa, if someone's listening to this and maybe they're in, I don't know, the corporate field or wherever it is, whatever work they're doing, they're listening to this and they're thinking maybe they've got a bit of burnout. They're also not sure. They feel like they want to change, but they're not quite sure what to do. How would you what kind of steps would you advise them, and just sort of some simple steps that they could kind of go through if they're in that position? And I like how you say that crossroads position in their life. How would you, is there like a step-by-step thing that you could kind of like briefly touch on or something like that?
Sure. Yeah. And these are steps I've already thought through, because they are the steps that are in my Illuminate Your Career Path course. Like, these are the basic steps that I take people through. Basically, the main steps are that you want to kind of take stock about where you're at right now. And it's helpful to do a little bit of thinking about where you've been. So doing a bit of a career history, thinking about, what's gotten you here so far. That can be really helpful, because sometimes the things that keep us stuck are the things that have happened in the past that need to kind of be taken care of. The next thing that I have people do is to really think about, making a list of what are their skills and expertise, and to really think about what do they have to offer in a certain role. And then to think about, in the future, what would be their ideal role? So I have to say that creating a vision of like, what's your perfect role, including what you're doing every day, what kind of environment you're in, what kind of people do you work in, what's the mission of the organization, what kind of impact would you like to have, and what are your benefits, how much time off, how much money you're making. All of these things are really important to get clear, because we really need to know what we're aiming for. And what I find is if you can get really clear about what your end goal is, then it starts to become clear what kind of decisions you need to be making right now.
What would you say are like some typical barriers people face when going through? I know you mentioned one or two things before. What other barriers or hurdles there are for people making a change in their career, would you say?
There are many external barriers. Maybe I'll just focus on the internal barriers.
Sounds good.
Because those external ones are kind of variable. But the internal barriers, I would say, one of them is just like lack of clarity. So a lot of people just can see that they have a lot of options, and they're not sure which option is right for them, and they are scared of making a mistake. I think particularly for the people who are working with me, who are, mid-career and also have they could have a family, or, they have put a lot of work into their career, into creating what they currently have right now, and they don't want to end up somewhere worse off by shaking things up. So people really want to make the right decision, right? So they feel some pressure about that. So it's like how to clarify which is the right option, how to create a strategy that really helps you to mitigate some of the risks that you're taking, right, by making some changes. And I think, the other one I mentioned is around low confidence, right? So if you're starting to get to a place where you're just like really starting to suffer and to question, how am I going to get out of this situation? You're often feeling low confidence. And so, yeah, those can be some of the biggest internal barriers. Yeah.
Yeah. That one about that fear factor of, am I making the right choice? That sounds just like your typical like decision making barrier, isn't it? Like the thing is, you just never know. You could kind of make, I think I heard somewhere like there's no like right choice. There's only a good way of making a choice, like a good way of doing it. Not obviously doing your due diligence, doing those exercises that you mentioned to get a good way of making a decision rather than there's no wrong choice in that sense. I could just so imagine that. I've been in that position a few times myself. I'm like, oh, is this the right way to do? Is this the right direction? I'm not sure. But yeah, sometimes you just have to take that leap, so to speak. And, again, if things don't work out, I'm assuming, there's backup plans. There's things that you could kind of, maybe reverse, or you could go back to what you're doing before, for example. People in those positions, I'm assuming the majority have built up quite good resumes and, they're quite... they've got like good experience. I'm sure things, there's other sort of plan Bs, so to speak, that they could kind of fall into. So, but yeah, it's hard to see those, isn't it? Sometimes.
Well, I mean, you're right that there are no perfect decisions, right? We just can't anticipate everything, and we have to do the best we can. I feel like this is where having a really clear vision for yourself and the future that you would like to have and what your aim is having that really clear can really help you in moments like that, because it gives you this sense of purpose, right? So I made this decision because here's what I'm aiming for, and this is why it's important to me, and these are the values that represents about me. So I'm going to make this decision because I really feel like good about it in this very like steady and, this very internal way. Like, so, even if some things that you didn't plan, like, life throws you a curveball about that decision, right? You're still like, well, I made that decision because I was really clear about why it was important and where I'm trying to go. So, now I'll make the next decision that is also aligned with that bigger vision that I have for myself, right? And that really makes a difference, right? When you're really clear about, essentially it's your why, I'm really clear about why I made that decision. So I'm going to make the next one now that's aligned with that too.
Yeah. And I like that. And I always think about this thing about like failure immunity. Again, we always think like, oh, if I take this path and if I get it wrong, oh, that's the end of the world. But then if we think about it like it's a learning thing, it's like, okay, we've gone down this path A. All right, it didn't work. I've learned from that. I'm going to go try path B. So you're not failing. You're kind of testing, experimenting. Okay, that didn't work. I'm going to try the next one. Keep going. And then you just kind of reiterate. And that's kind of like in a way that you're learning. You're not failing. So if you think, I like that kind of thinking about about failure. Anyway, just a quick thought on that one. Okay. And then how about funding career changes? Because I know, there's obviously timelines for this. I'm assuming it varies from person to person in terms of their timeline to do it and, the budgets people have to do. I'm assuming they do need some sort of budget, a bit of funding to go behind some of these career changes, because obviously they've got living expenses to go through. How would someone navigate their way through a career change, considering like the budgets and funding? Is that something that you touch on with clients, or how would you advise on that side?
Sure. Yeah. So funding is definitely very important, and it does really depend on the scope of the career change that someone's thinking of. So if they're thinking of the more radical career change, like, for example, the lawyer who wants to leave law and go to more like working in nonprofits or in arts, that's a really big difference. So the most, I think the biggest thing to plan for is really that, I really think it's always important that clients are really clear about how much their monthly expenses are, right? So using some sort of tracking device to just get down your monthly expenses and understand how much you're spending. Then to do some research and some planning about how long will your transition potentially take. So for example, if you're planning on being unemployed for a certain amount of time or taking a career break or sabbatical, like to really thinking about how long is this transition going to possibly take? And then, timesing the monthly budget by how long you think it's going to take to give yourself a bit of an emergency fund, a savings. It's really important for people to understand that to make a transition, it's very hard, and you're having to stretch yourself and push yourself, right? And having finances that can support you during that time is going to be really important, so that you're not being drained on kind of all fronts. You're stretching yourself professionally, and also you're feeling stretched financially. That's not a good setup. So you should really try to plan so that you're in a safe and secure place to be making stretches in the parts of your life that are the most important ones for that moment.
Yeah, and that just made me think actually about transitions. I'm assuming there's different types. There's someone that's kind of full-time working at that stage, but then they on the side are kind of experimenting with things. And then there's also that sort of, maybe on the other scale, is completely quit work, try this other thing, and then maybe in the middle there's this sort of sabbatical career break thing, or maybe reducing their hours from their current work and giving them space to try this new venture or whatever it is. What do you find is, what would you consider a good sort of transition format or stepping stone, or what would you consider a good transition or a bad one in that sense?
Well, I mean, like you said, there's lots of variations. There's lots of ways that people do this. You can do it with savings. Some people do it with severance pay, right? When they've gotten laid off from a job, they do it with severance pay, or have gotten, or with unemployment. They do it with by leaning more heavily on a spouse's or a partner's salary during this particular amount of time, or they do it they do it in smaller steps, right? Maybe they start to develop a side hustle. Maybe they find contract work and start doing it part-time. There's a book actually called Decide by Chip and Dan Heath that I think is a great book.
Oh, yeah.
And they talk about ooching, which I think is you ooch into your bigger change that you're thinking. I think that making smaller steps can be really helpful, because then you can kind of test things out, see if they're working. You see if you like it, which things you kind of need to change along the way. And I think one of the most important things to keep in mind if you're thinking of a bigger career change is, what's often called the bridge job. So it's the halfway step between your bigger leap and where you are right now.
Okay.
So for example, I've worked with people who came from my previous field of international development, and they have been working overseas. They want to go back to the US and work more domestically, right? Sometimes that overseas experience doesn't translate immediately to a domestic job. And, people it'll be harder for them to kind of get in the door for a job that is more locally based. So they might have to take a halfway step of maybe working for in international development within the United States, at a headquarters job, then start taking contract work into other types of fields. So I've had some be able to transition then through a bridge job into climate work or into AI. But it takes a sort of job that kind of combines half of what they were doing before and half maybe of what they were or what they're hoping to do next. So they can start to get credibility in their new field. Yeah.
Ah, nice.
and new
Okay.
context.
And just about that credibility side, do you think people need to take, if they're thinking of another career, do they need to get these massive certifications or maybe go back to university? Do you see that happening a lot, or do you think it's needed to have these big certifications or
I
not?
think it really depends on what you're trying to do. But I would say, when you ask about the finance part of a type of change, I would say that this is one of my biggest places where I really urge clients to research, to really test assumptions. A lot of people feel more secure. They'll be like, okay, I will feel confident changing careers if I have this big, if I have this master's degree or, this big fancy degree for my next thing. So it's important that you really think about, okay, do I need additional education? How much is it going to cost? Is the ROI really there? How soon can you expect to make that money back? Because I do think that often these are, higher education can be super expensive, or certifications. And it's really important to think critically about, do I really need it? And how soon will it be paid off? Is it really worth? Because it's not just money, it is time. Often it's very time consuming. And the worst thing it's going to feel terrible if you're on the other side of that and you're like, it didn't really have the results that you wanted it to have, right? So I guess that's my other really big couple of pieces of advice I would have is really check your assumptions about what do you need to do for your career change. And if it's expensive, definitely look into that because to check your assumptions. And the second piece of advice would be don't do your career change in isolation. A lot of times we think, okay, I got to figure this out on my own. Everyone else figures it out on their own. I got to be able to figure this out on my own. But actually, you're going to make much better decisions and have access to much better opportunities if you open up your questions to other people and say, here's what I'm thinking. Here's my situation. What advice do you have? Look for trusted people or even people who maybe you don't even know them that well, but they can offer you a different perspective, a richer perspective, get their advice, see what they say. Also look for role models. So maybe the career change, you notice that someone's made a career change or is in a field without a big expensive degree. How did they do it? See if there are things from their path that you can take into your own journey.
Yeah, I love that. Because we always think I'm just going to think about this myself in my own space. I'm going to journal a few things, which that can help sometimes. But then we're always in our own little bubble. And it really helps to kind of as you said, share it with other people, get other people's opinions, get different perspectives. Because, sometimes you're looking at one dimensional, one angle, but other people might be able to just be like, did you think about this? And you're like, oh yeah, forgot about that or something. Though, that is massive. That is a massive thing to incorporate. Okay. And then Lisa, before I go over to the rapid fire questions, is there anything else on career change or any watch outs for, going back to that person that's thinking about it, they're a bit burnt out, they think they're in the crossroads, any other watch outs for them or anything else you wanted to mention about career changes?
I feel like I've hit on most of it, actually. I think I would just add on to what we were just talking about, which is that there are lots of reasons why I think that people kind of go into sort of a self-isolation mode when they're at a crossroads. There can be that feeling of I'm the only one, or I should be able to figure this out by myself, or sometimes there's also creeps in a feeling of failure. When we're closing up a chapter, we're if only I'd been more successful, or I should have been stronger. I shouldn't have gotten burned out. If I was stronger, I wouldn't get burned out, and that those can be really tough things, big feelings. So, but in general, it's going to feel a lot better if you can find ways to open up, to share what you're working on with other people and get their support and ideas, and just not to feel so alone in it.
Okay, Lisa, we'll go over to the quick fire round. And basically, I'll be asking you 6 questions. If you just give me a brief answer for each one, that would be great. And if you're ready, I'll get started with the first one.
Okay.
All right. So question number 1. What is your definition of freedom?
My definition of freedom is feeling like we can make changes to our future about how I'd like to live and how I'd like to work.
Nice. And then question number 2. What's something you wish you'd done 10 years ago?
So 10 years ago would have been around, so it's actually my 10-year anniversary of living in Catalonia. So moving to a new country and starting my own business in a new career and getting married. It was all at one time.
A lot happening.
There are a lot of things I could have done differently, but I think probably what I would do is I would go and take more like just basics of starting a business, basic best practices as a self-employed person, starting a business. Yeah.
Nice. Good one. Question number 3. What are 1 or 2 daily habits that have helped you in your journey so far?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of daily habits because I have realized that having lots of energy just like really helps you create the kind of life that you really want to have. So my daily habits that really help are being outdoors, spending time outdoors, living close to nature has been really, really good for me. And this isn't a daily habit, but it is a weekly habit of that 2 years ago, I started lifting weights. And I have to say that doing weight training, especially at midlife, has just really helped me to feel a lot stronger. I also, I had kids when I was, just around 40. So as my kids get older, I just really want to have a strong body and lots of energy to be able to parent these kids,
Are you doing like bench presses and stuff? Or is it like
deadlifts? Yeah.
Nice.
Squats, we got the whole thing.
Good stuff. Question number 4. What's your most important lesson in life?
This is such a big question. But I think for me personally, it's been that there are a lot of things about your background and your upbringing that can really influence what you feel like is possible for your life. But it really is up to you. There's always the possibility of taking a pause and really thinking about, for me, what do I want? And what is really going to make me happy and feel like I have had a meaningful life?
Nice. I like that. Nicely said. Question number 5. What's 2 or 3 transformational book recommendations that have helped you on your journey that you'd like to share with others?
Sure. So one of them is, as we were just talking about with habits, I really have enjoyed the book Atomic Habits. Mm-hmm. So in just thinking about how can we build on habits that are going to help us, make meaningful progress on our goals. That one's been a great one. I would also say another book that I really have enjoyed and I continue to think about often is the book Win, WHEN by Daniel Pink, which is about when is the best time for us to actually get things done. So thinking about timing for when we try to get things done, I am kind of a habits and productivity nerd. Another book that I often recommend to clients is Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff. So it's really about, how can we be more supportive of ourselves, which I think is actually a way of really helping us be more productive, right? When we can be more kind and gentle with ourselves and understanding of when we run into obstacles and to support ourselves through those moments. And just like a fun sort of inspirational book that I always enjoy reading is Endurance, which is about Shackleton's voyage to Antarctica. It's by Alfred Lansing. So that's a book that I think is just really interesting for thinking about human resilience and what we're capable of. So, and it's also a great adventure story. I love adventures.
Nice. Yeah, I've so When is on my list. I haven't read that one, but yeah, that sounds really cool. And then the self-compassionate and the last one you mentioned, that sounds interesting as well. So yeah, thank you very much for that. And then just on the last question, what's the biggest takeaway you want listeners to learn from our chat today?
I would just offer encouragement for that if you are thinking of some sort of change, career, life change, if it keeps coming back to you, you keep thinking about it, it probably is really important for you to do. And it's going to be one of those things that you're not going to regret doing. So there's also a book, also by Daniel H. Pink, that is about the power of regret. And he talks about how one of the most common types of regrets are the things that we have not done. And it's kind of a regret of bravery, right? So yeah, I would just say be brave, do the thing that keeps calling you. It's there for a reason, and it's really important you respond to it.
That's lovely. Yeah, I like that. Nice words of wisdom, Lisa. Okay, thanks for doing the rapid fire round. So is there anywhere you'd like the listeners to go to? Any sort of programs coming up, any initiatives that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so if you're interested in staying in touch with me, you are definitely welcome to go check out my website. It's my full name, lisahoashi.com. And there you'll also see that I have a quick guide for you. If you want to do some thinking about what is your next step, I have an exercise there that's called Clarify Your Path in 15 minutes. So you can download that from the website if you'd like to. And also subscribe to my newsletter list. I often share, weekly advice and inspiration on my email list. And I also have often free workshops that will help you to think about, whether it's a career change or other types of changes you'd like to make in your life. There will be some free workshops that I offer throughout the year. And you're also welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to make a connection there. That's my main social media place for my business.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Lisa. And thank you so much for dropping by and spending your time with us today. Thank you very much for today.
Well, it's been a great pleasure, Greg. Thanks so much for inviting me here. It's been great to talk to you.
Thank you for spending your time with us today. If you need more help, you can check out our free guides and services on our website, freedombeforefire.com. If you have a burning question or just want to chat, don't hesitate to drop me an email at greg@freedombeforefire.com. If you found the show useful and want to be notified of future episodes, you can click follow on Spotify, Apple, or the app you're currently using right now. If you think the episode will help a friend or a colleague, feel free to share it with them. And lastly, if you learned just one good thing that will help you in your journey and you want to help us out, please do leave a 5-star rating on your podcast player app. That would help us out loads. Alright, so I hope you've learned a thing or two if you're currently considering a career change. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to Lisa or to myself. Otherwise, have an awesome week and I'll catch you on the next one. And as always, practice gratitude, live life by your design, and do things that make you smile. You got this.